Welcome. I'm Jeff Cole. I run the Center for the Digital Future at the USC Annenberg School. We're the hosts and very proud to be the hosts of the GDKP, which we're going to talk about in our session today. Let's start with Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who's Vice Chairman of NITI, the National Institution for Transforming India. The chair of NITI is Prime Minister Modi. And Dr. Kumar serves in the rank and status of a cabinet minister. He also serves as the chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune, India. His earlier stint in government was initially with the Ministry of Industry and subsequently in the Ministry of Finance as economic advisor during the reform years of 1991 to 94. He also served as an independent director on the central boards of the Reserve Bank of India and the State Bank of India. He has wide experience of having worked in government, academia, industry associations, as well as in financial institutions. He holds a PhD in economics from Lucknow University in India and a doctorate of philosophy from Oxford University in the UK. Oxford, I guess, was the best you could do as a university. Anyway, Dr. Kumar, welcome. It is truly an honor to have you as part of this conversation, and let's get started. So first, before we get to the GDKP, which Professor Sopaso will talk about, can you tell us a little bit about how the Indian economy has changed under Prime Minister Modi, and especially after you became Vice Chair of NITI, which I think is one of his major priorities?
First and foremost, thanks very much, Professor Cole, for having this conversation and this meeting, and for inviting me for this conversation with you and Professor Sulpaso. Great pleasure to be here, and thanks for the introduction as well. About the Indian economy, when Prime Minister Modi was elected the Prime Minister in 2014, the economy had started slipping. The growth rate had started declining. He inherited an economy which was characterized by a whole lot of scams and banking sector problems, and a great deal of sort of dissatisfaction, as it were, about the economic governance and economic management, and rising inequalities. And what he brought during the first term of 2014 to 2019 was to lay the foundations of more equitable, sustainable, and rapid growth in India. And by that I mean is that, one, he focused a lot of attention on getting the benefits of growth to those at the bottom of the pyramid. Let me not go into detail, but there are several schemes which were launched. But he was innovative in a way that he made his first priority as what he called Swachh Bharat, or Clean India, by which he wanted to eliminate open defecation in the country in all of its 650,000 villages and towns and cities. Now, it was not something, it was very unfashionable to talk about something like that by the Indian elite and the Indian people, but that was the reality that we had in India. And he sort of said that, even Mahatma Gandhi had said that for him, cleanliness was more important than independence, as it were, because that will change the lives of the people in a true sense, in a real sense. Those are the sort of scheme that he launched. Plus, he got some structural reforms going, which had never been attempted, which were hanging for a very long time, and I refer to two of them. One was the Generalized Services and Trade Tax, the GST tax, which made India into one unified market and removed all the interstate barriers for the movement of commerce and trade by having the single tax, for different rate for all the products and commodities and services. So it required a constitutional amendment and a grand bargain between the central government and the state governments to get that going. And the second one that he got was, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which which we know, very well in the US, but we didn't have a mechanism whereby you could save the enterprise while punishing the entrepreneur who has not done as well as who's not done what he or she should be doing. So those are two kinds of structural reforms, plus several others in terms of the income tax reduction, and better tax administration and so on that he brought. Unfortunately for us, because of the banking sector scams and the need to clean up the banking sector, which was led by Raghuram Rajan, who was then the governor of our Reserve Bank, this is the central bank of the country, and he started in 2013 a very stringent process of cleaning up all the non-performing assets and all the balance sheets of all the banks in the country, as a result of which the credit growth in India just suddenly completely plummeted. In fact, banks were unable to extend credit to businesses, and which, as you know, would of course result in a slowdown of business activity, of investment activity in the country. Yet we achieved a 7.8% rate of GDP growth between 2014 to 2019 on average. But the last year of that saw the growth beginning to decline, and we were hoping that by March of 2020, this year, because we run a fiscal year, so our fiscal year runs from April to March, we were hoping that this would be the bottoming out of the Indian economic cycle, but then came the COVID. But nonetheless, economic activity has begun to return. I'm glad to note as an economist that in many sectors, our economic activity is now almost up to pre-COVID days, up to February 2020. And that's a good sign going forward. So the negative impact is working its way out. And I'm hoping that by the end of the first quarter of 2021, we will be in positive territories once again.
So just a couple of comments. 7.8% GDP growth before COVID is truly extraordinary in an economy of your size. That seems to make the case for NITI and for centralized planning. Seems to make a very effective case.
Yeah, but thanks for saying that. But it's not enough because the point is that for where we are, our economic transition is still incomplete. We are way below. We are at less than $2,000 per capita. To get our people onto it at a level where their basic needs, their fundamental welfare situations are all met, we need to at least triple this to go forward. I mean, I'm not even saying that we will be competing with the advanced economies, etc. But to get the basic needs of good living, sort of acceptable living standards, along with maintaining environmental sustainability, and making sure that our future generations are not ridden with debt, because that's where our Prime Minister has been very prudent in terms of fiscal terms. I think all of those together, we still need more than 8%, 8.5% growing. And the problem has been that in the last year, 2019-20, our growth rate had come down. And in the last quarter of January to March 2020, it had actually come down to 4.2%. 3.8%. So that the average for the year became 4.2. Now that's just simply unacceptable, and we know that. And therefore, what the Prime Minister has done now, that in these 7 or 8 months, he has used them to usher in one more set of very fundamental structural reforms. We have freed our agriculture from government controls. We've given our farmers the freedom to sell anywhere they like. We have liberalized our mining sector. especially the coal mining sector. We have taken steps, to bring in foreign direct investments, liberalize it completely, including in defense production, where there are now a number of US companies, large US companies, which are entering. So we have used this period to lay the foundations of a strong, sustainable recovery when we do start in the post-COVID period, which, as I said, we expect to happen between January, beginning of next calendar year.
They are still impressive numbers, and we hope you can sustain them. One last comment, and then we'll turn to Professor Silpaso to tell us about the GDKP. On your literal campaign to clean up India, on the anti-defecation movement, was that done through laws and penalties, or setting an example, or social media, or traditional media, or how did that campaign work?
There were there were two necessary conditions to that, Jeff. One was to allocate enough financial resources for every household to get a toilet, in the country. And for that, I forget the exact numbers, but a very large, significant budget allocation was done, starting with 2014 itself. For every year, there was, the budget allocation kept increasing. And the second necessary condition was to spread the word that cleanliness is next to godliness. I mean, in some sense, and to reach the word to every household that it is, and especially the women were targeted, that to maintain the dignity of the women, you've got to have this basic thing in your house, which is a toilet where nobody has to go out to the fields. All the celebrity stars were roped into this. The social media went. The biggest campaign was launched in all Indian languages. One doesn't realize the complexity of our country. We have 18 national languages. So we need to have all those campaigns there. And the Prime Minister took pains to go, on the Red Fort and make it a part of his annual Independence Day speech, and give numbers that such and such has happened and so has happened. And finally, last year, on the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, 2nd October 2019, we were able to declare India, open defecation free, because we had reached, 100% of the households in all our villages and all our cities. Now, what we are trying to do is to make sure that you get these things to be maintained and sustained. But that's also not easy, because you've got all the sort of related issues. But believe you me, we are beginning to see the good results of this policy even on our health. Because as you can imagine, yes, basic hygiene, for our young children, the diarrheas and all the sort of, all the waterborne diseases, so on, that's beginning to come down. So that's how we achieved it. Enough resources, financial resources, human resources, a mission mode, and making it into what the Prime Minister calls a Jan Andolan, which is a people's movement, a mass movement. And that's what we did. That's what we were able to do in the country.
Congratulations. An unpleasant topic, but fascinating, and I assume will be studied for generations, the campaign that India launched. Really remarkable. All right, let's talk about the GDKP, what we're all here for, and let's move to the father of the GDKP, the man who thought it up. Umberto Silpaso was born in Bari, Italy. He has a doctorate from Italian universities and an MBA from Columbia University. I've heard of that, Umberto. He's taught in many universities and worked extensively with one of our colleagues, Professor Archie Kleingartner of UCLA. He's written many books on economics, including Darwinomics, and his motto is knowledge is the right course of action, for which he's always tried to transform economic theories, which are sometimes incomprehensible, into facts. And we are short of facts in the world today, or short of people using facts. For this reason, he was instrumental in the adoption in Italy of the law on mutual funds, for the adoption of the educational credit card, and created the first multimedia university, a project I was a part of, in the 13th century castle of Federico II in the city of Gualdo Tadino, one of the most picture-perfect towns on the face of the earth. His latest book is The New Enlightenment in Economics, The Birth of the GDKP, where it came from, how you developed it, what you see for it. So let's move to Dr. Kumar. Let's start, Dr. Kumar, for the first time viewers of meeting the two of you. It's hard not to fall in love with Professor Solpaso's charm. Some of that comes from being Italian. Some of that comes from just being really genuine and charming. But let's talk about, how did you meet Professor Solpaso? How do you describe the relationship?
I used to be heading an independent think tank, a research organization called ICRIA, in the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, which was known to be doing independent research, policy-oriented research. And I think somebody directed Umberto, when he had come to India, to try and see whether this research organization would get involved in taking forward this idea. And as he said, the person was Ambassador Fabian, KP Fabian, who had set up this meeting in 2008, I think, or 2007, somewhere like that. And that's how I met Umberto. In some sense, pardon my saying so, but in some sense, Umberto came looking for a collaborator because he had recognized that India is a peculiar economy because our share of the services sector and our share of the knowledge sector is much larger given our total GDP, our per capita GDP, than in most of the countries, because our services at this level of our per capita GDP, the services sector contribute about 53%, which is very often an advantage. So that's why I think India attracted him. And once we had met and I had understood, the concept that he's talking about, I thought it was just a very good idea to try and measure the knowledge content of the economy, because India was committed to and is committed to creating what we call a knowledge economy. Because we know and we realized that as we go forward, and you know better better than anybody else, being the head of the digital future, that it will be knowledge which will bring about transformation, change, better, better livelihood, whatever. So more and more. Sometimes I refer to it also as saying that what we are seeing is, what we are seeing is a transformation of our GDP, but it's becoming lighter in terms of the contribution of the natural resources, the iron and the steel and the aluminium, etc., as part of the total economy is becoming increasingly, is declining, and as other parts, which are contributing more to our lives and our livelihoods. Realizing that, I started my association with him, and that then continued when I became the head of the largest Association of Indian Industry and Businesses, called the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I was appointed the Secretary General, and I sort of brought Umberto there because the businesses were also interested in this, and then introduced him to our statistical system, and our statistical establishment, whereby the work started, the technical work started. So let me say here, and the concept is very attractive. It's seductive, and it's obviously it has a lot. It captures a lot of what is what is happening in the economy, but it's very difficult to pin it down technically, because that's the issue. I'm reminded all the time of the work of Professor Simon Kuznets when he brought in the 1960s the idea of GDP, because nobody was there to measure economic activity. So it's the same thing here. We require a sort of in some sense a fresh technical approach to be able to the two matrices that he talked about, the knowledge producers matrices and the knowledge user matrices, are difficult to pin down, because you have to start off by first and foremost defining what is a knowledge product. Is a newspaper a knowledge product, or is it only a algorithm which is a knowledge product? And between the two, the huge range that you have, how do you define them? How do you categorize them? What is the data that you start using to capture that? Then to sort of accumulate it, make time series of it, compare it across countries. It's a huge, tremendous, technical exercise, and that's what we are trying to launch in the country. I'm glad to say that having introduced Umberto to our statistical econometric establishment, they have all conceptually accepted this. They think that it should be done, but we are now in the process of the modalities for actually getting it down on paper, and that's a challenge. But we have accepted the challenge because, after all, the think tank that I'm heading now is the National Institute for Transforming India. So therefore, transformation of India. So that's an idea which I think is a legitimate idea to pursue in NITI Aayog.
And of course, COVID has shown us that it's the knowledge industries that were best prepared to work during COVID and will come out of it the strongest.
Yes.
So if the GDKP becomes an international standard, does it replace the GDP? Does it work in tandem? Do they complement each other? Are they competitive? What's the role of the GDP with the GDKP?
One way of looking at it is what Umberto says, which is that you could have a coefficient, which is the GDKP divided by GDP, or the other way around. Whichever is larger. Maybe the GDKP, the way you, and that's where all the technicalities come in as to how you estimate it. Do you estimate it as a fraction of the GDP, or do you put the GDP numbers together along with the knowledge, which is not been measured? So that doesn't matter. But a ratio of GDKP to GDP can be compared across countries. So the two will remain in tandem, and we use, therefore, to compare the knowledge intensity of any economy, because that may well define its future prospects for growth, especially in the current world, where given the fourth or the fifth technological revolution, as artificial intelligence comes along, as deep machine learning comes along, as humans unfortunately get replaced, by machines driven by knowledge, you would get people more interested in what is the extent and depth of knowledge in any system, in any economy, to be able to place their bets, as it were, on their future prospects. But do please remember that GDP itself is quite often now questioned by people who are saying that, look, what about social capital? What about natural capital? Why aren't you taking why aren't you, building those in? So what we will see, I'm sure, is that GDP will soon enough be transformed into something which is more reflective of our current reality. By that, what I mean is that you cannot have a comparison which is based devoid of anything that we do to the climate. If the planet is facing a climate emergency, the effort that a system or a society makes to prevent that, or and to fight that, must be included in the calculus of economic activity. Similarly, for example, a very tiny country called Bhutan says that we want to measure not GDP, but we want to measure the gross happiness index, because they are saying that you don't need $40,000 per capita to achieve the gross, the happiness coefficient. Your happiness may come with much greater interaction with nature, and to be living with nature rather than conflict with nature. Now, I mean, I'm sure that could be a concept to be adopted by post-industrial, post-alphabet societies, and why not? So, and I think in India, for example, we have had a philosophical background where we don't see eye to eye with the Marxian concept of the ultimate contradiction between man and nature. We think that it is man in nature that should be talked about. And for that, we don't need the kind of, per capita income, that advanced economies, have reached. Now, that's where things will become very different. But coming back to GDKP, I think to capture the immense contribution and impact that knowledge is making and will make even more so in the future, GDKP would be a powerful concept to start comparing economic systems and societies and companies as we go forward.
That's a very powerful discussion and a fascinating analysis of GDP and some of the inherent weaknesses. My suspicion is that the social justice movement, which seems to be taking root worldwide, will also cause a reevaluation of just pure economic output, irrespective of the consequences. So India has become the first country to adopt the GDKP, and what an extraordinary accomplishment for Professor Solpasso, that one of the 5 biggest economies, and I don't know where you are with China as the first or second biggest country in the world, but you're one of the 2 biggest to adopt it, is really remarkable. Can you tell us a little bit about India's plan for the GDKP? Where are you now? How are the calculations going to be made and by whom? And when is it likely to be completed?
That's a very good but a very difficult question, because, as I said, it's by no means a simple exercise. I think we have made a very good start. We are now approaching our National Statistics Commission, which is a supreme body in the country, within the government, to give us the go-ahead and therefore the resources, which come with it, to start this process. We've put together a team already of specialists,
very good team,
who will work with Professor Solpasso. We are hoping that we're not hoping, we are sure that he will lead the effort, and that he will come down here. And once you've got this, this team working away, and the go-ahead by our National Statistical Commission, that will be the beginning of the process to start putting together the 2 matrices that Umberto talked about, the producers metric and the users matrix. I would think, given the conceptual clarity that Umberto has and the statistical team, the team of statisticians that we are putting forward, I would give it 6 months to a year.
And when we talk about startup nations, and you looked at Umberto's list in 2017 of the companies that are dominating the economy, almost all of them are less than 20 years old. So the concept of startup nations is really exciting. So we're hosting the GDKP in the Center for the Digital Future. Professor Solpasso is a senior fellow. We're setting up the Solpasso Institute. And at the center, we're 25 years old. We're less interested in publishing articles in academic journals and more interested in supporting work that can change the world, to work closely with corporations, policymakers, NGOs around the world. And I can't think of a better project that really symbolizes our mission and our commitment than the GDKP, and the extraordinary happiness we have that the government of India has embraced this and is implementing it. This is exactly what we were created for. And for that, Professor Salpaso, we are deeply appreciative of the work you've done and sharing it with us. And Dr. Kumar, we are really equally appreciative of your commitment to this and the support of India. And I think collectively and with others who will join, this will be important work that will really make its mark. Thank you, both of you, for all of your work in this and your contributions. We look forward to a lot more.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeff. Bye for now.